When AEW began weekly programming in 2019, the world of professional wrestling changed forever, as a brand new alternative in North America was bred. A monopoly that was sustained for over a decade finally had some competition after years of disconnect between a section of the audience and the single source of nationally broadcasted professional wrestling. The clamoring for something different had finally ended as AEW Dynamite aired and a new era in the sport had begun. I was there for that first episode, and I've been there ever since. I haven't missed a single AEW Dynamite, even as the product has begun to stray away from what made it special in my eyes. I'm still a weekly viewer of AEW television. For those of you who have followed the channel, you may have questioned that and whether I still follow the product due to the lack of videos, but AEW is still as much of a part of my life as it has been since 2019. A heavy majority of my content has been looking at the positives in AEW, theorizing about storylines and the futures of certain wrestlers, giving my take on booking decisions and discussing a product that I genuinely love and that genuinely engages me. Or, I should say, one that engaged me. See, somewhere along the way, AEW lost its magic. Its allure that once made it special is gone, and in my opinion, AEW has become as formulaic as the giant it once aimed to slay. It brings me no joy to make this video at all, which is why I haven't made this video in so long. I would have loved to have brought you guys more content on things I've found interesting in AEW, but that list has been very small, and anything that I did have interest in for a week or two slowly faded into dust. Today, I would like to touch on some points that have led me to my feelings on the current product. This is by no means an attack on AEW or Tony Khan. They've brought some fantastic moments in the 4 years they've been producing content, and I actually believe that the path back to glory isn't as long and arduous as it may seem on face value. However, these are things that need highlighting, as they are the same issues that led so many people to abandoning WWE at one point or another. Feel free to agree or disagree with me with anything I have to say in this video, and hopefully in the future I can make the videos that I once enjoyed making so much. And yes, by the way, this is what I look like. Let's begin with what made AEW so great in the first place, something that really set them out from the pack in the early days. Long-term booking. This is a term that's become more common over the past few years, and something that was missing from North American television for a very long time. When AEW started out, it was very obvious that there were plans put in place for years down the road. The most famous example of this would be Kenny Omega versus Hangman Adam Page, but there were other examples such as MJF and Cody Rhodes, FTR and the Young Bucks, and even Thunder Rosa versus Britt Baker, or MJF versus Chris Jericho. Anybody jumping the gun to defend AEW's instant reaction would be to say that there's still been good long-term booking this year, but the truth is that there really hasn't been. I'll throw AEW a bone and say that the Elite versus the BCC has been pretty good, but rather than long-term booking, I would just label it as an overall long feud. Other people may suggest the Four Pillars feud as long-term booking, but that is not how I define long-term booking. There is a major difference between a subtle build-up towards a feud and a match compared to a feud or a match that just has history behind it. Those are two different things. The members of the Pillars have history. I would know, my first video was on them. But that does not mean that this feud was built on the back of long-term booking. Actually, it's the complete opposite. They all came out together on the exact same night, staking claims to the world title. While on the topic of this feud, I actually don't mind it happening, and I do think it should be part of MJF's title run, but here lies another example of something AEW has been guilty of doing recently, and that is lacking consistency when it comes to characters. Sammy Guevara has absolutely no right to challenge for this world title. It's plain and simple. The man has no business coming out and claiming to be one of the 4 best wrestlers in the company. The most frustrating thing about it is that it would have been so easy to build Sammy up for just a month or two before this feud to make it somewhat realistic and believable. This year, Darby Allin has been TNT champion and has defeated the likes of Samoa Joe, Buddy Matthews, Juice Robinson, and Swerve Strickland in singles competition. Similarly, Jungle Boy, who hasn't been as active as Darby this year, still posts singles wins against Brian Cage, Ethan Page, and Christian Cage. And at this stage, that's incredible. Age, I don't have anything else to rhyme with age. I was trying to find something else to rhyme and I couldn't. So obviously there was a concerted effort to actually give Darby and Jack Perry some steam heading into this feud. But where was this same energy for Sammy Guevara? The guy is out here talking about how much he deserves a world title shot after playing third fiddle in the Jericho Appreciation Society. Before this feud began, his biggest singles win this year was against Action Andretti, and the reason that was his biggest win I could find was because it was his only singles win this year. Funnily enough, this inconsistency and delusion actually fits in with Sammy's character, who doesn't know if he's a face who's leaving the inner circle because of their infighting, or a heel joining Jericho to take out former members of the inner circle he said he loved no matter what when he left. Does that make sense? Sammy, who removed himself from his group of brothers because they accepted a known rat who he doesn't trust, named MJF, to someone who then trusts MJF and does his bidding and calls him his best friend. All that aside, purely in-ring, how am I meant to take Sammy seriously when he comes out claiming he should be world champion? Regardless of my opinion on Sammy, which is that he is boring outside of the ring, it makes no sense, and is something that is so easily refutable that he really doesn't deserve a world title shot. He doesn't deserve any singles title shot with the way he's been booked since he lost the TNT title. And honestly, this was something that should have been thought about beforehand. This isn't a small mistake or oversight that should be accepted or swept under the rug. If anyone can come into the ring, claim they deserve a title shot, and actually end up getting one, what does that say about the level of your championship? Power rankings don't have to be followed religiously, but it's one of the most pivotal parts of professional wrestling to have a #1 contender who has actually warranted and earned a title shot through singles wins, preferably on pay-per-view. That is Wrestling 101. And that's something I learned playing SmackDown vs. Raw 2008. The reason this matters so much is because it devalues your championship, which leads me to my next issue with AEW so far this year compared to previous. In the world of professional wrestling, championships are the absolute pinnacle of the sport. Outside of kayfabe and in real life, they are a symbol of excellence in the field. It's a reward for years of hard work, honing your craft and becoming elite, pardon the pun. Kayfabe wise, it isn't that much different. Anyone holding a title or competing for a title is at the absolute top of the sport. They are the highlight of the show and the company, and the storylines they are booked in should largely be the most interesting and important on television. They should be in a feud that develops well and that culminates in an engaging climax of a match, more likely than not at the most important shows of the year. AEW has had some absolutely incredible champions in the past. There is no denying that. So far, each world champion has been deserving of the crown for one reason or another, but even the minor championships have had some very respectable holders. TNT champions such as Brody Lee, Cody Rhodes, Miro, you know I had to fit Miro in somewhere, and Darby Allin. Tag team champions like FTR, the Young Bucks, the Lucha Brothers. The women's title has had the likes of Hikaru Shida and Dr. Britt Baker, and even the recent AEW All-Atlantic title, as it was called at the time, had Pac as a pretty solid inaugural champion. These were all good or great champions with good or great title runs. And yes, there is a difference. You could be a really credible world champion when you earn the title, but that doesn't mean that your run will be great. On the other hand, you could be an undeserved wrestler who actually ends up having a really good title run. And of course, you could be neither, or you could be both. I'm finding that recently, the reigns have been a bit more lackluster than the champions deserve, and most champions fade into complete obscurity after they drop their titles. This devalues the title because the person who was just carrying it is clearly nothing special and not relevant, which builds the trend, and therefore the belief, that you don't have to be special to carry a title in AEW. I'll barely touch on the Women's World Championship because that whole division has been a wreck since Britt Baker dropped the title, but Toni Storm's reign, who by the way, while she held the belt, was the interim, she only became lineage champion after she dropped it, was pretty average, and Jamie Hayter's has been virtually non-existent. She's defended the title 3 times this year and has been almost a side character in a multi-women feud. She deserves a lot more and is hopefully gearing up for a feud one day against Britt Baker, but I really wouldn't be surprised if she dropped it to Saraya sooner rather than later. Former tag team champions The Acclaimed were more than deserving champions when they won the tag team titles, but quickly became a repetitive act akin to the New Day of WWE. I cannot blame the crowd for loving The Acclaimed. I'm sure in real life they are a fantastic act to see. And on paper, their title reign had some solid defenses, but I was more than happy for the Guns to defeat them, who went on to have a short and sweet title reign. FTR as champions is obviously great. Top guys always bringing credibility to any tag team titles they hold. Now we get to the TNT title and international titles, who unfortunately have not had as much luck. The TNT title, in my opinion, has never really recovered since the hot potatoing between Cody Rhodes and Sammy Guevara, and then later Scorpio Sky and Sammy Guevara, but that was a while ago, and there have been some really top quality holders of the title recently, specifically with Darby Allin and Samoa Joe. Wardlow should have been a really great TNT champion, and I actually made a video calling him the savior of the TNT title. But come on, are you serious? But unsurprisingly, he lost a lot of steam after he broke up with MJF. Again, a video that I made and a concern of mine at the time. He's just not that interesting. I don't know what his story is, but Wardlow should be a great TNT champion. His first reign was actually not that bad, and he lost the belt to Samoa Joe in a really good feud. Joe then lost that title to Darby Allin, a poor decision in my books as Joe was just beginning to heat up as the king of television. Joe reminded me actually a lot of Miro as TNT champion, a genuine top 10 guy kayfabe-wise. Someone who is great in the ring, great on the mic, has fantastic video packages, and is overall a demeaning and mighty champion who is hard to knock off his throne. But he actually was knocked off that throne in just 46 days, but then he reclaimed the title a month later to hold it for another 32 days. We continue the hot potatoing as Wardlow has a 3-day title reign to lose the belt to Powerhouse Hobbs, a guy in Powerhouse Hobbs who, by the way, really did deserve the TNT title, but also a guy who had not a single noteworthy title defense as he lost the title back to Wardlow, who, similar to Sammy, is now a 3-time TNT champion for no real reason. In my opinion, the TNT title should be treated like the Intercontinental title used to be, a sign that you were ready to be world champion. The Intercontinental title has had some of the greatest professional wrestlers ever to hold it. It had incredible feuds, hard-earned reigns, and some of the most enthralling, engaging, and entertaining matches in wrestling history. And some of those earlier champions like Cody Rhodes, Darby Allin, Miro, all screamed future world champions. Maybe Cody Rhodes not with a stipulation, but Darby Allin is a future AEW World Champion, there's no doubt about that. Miro should be an AEW World Champion one day. Credible names that stayed credible after they lost the title. Joe, Wardlow, and Hobbs' feud was one of the best ones that the TNT title has had in a very long time, but in my opinion, there was a much cleaner way of having all 3 men hold it and have genuinely solid title runs. Instead of juggling between Joe and Darby, you just have Joe defeat Wardlow and go for a 100-day title reign. Powerhouse Hobbs defeats Joe and holds it for another 2 or 3 months, and then you have Wardlow come back and defeat Hobbs. The old rock, paper, scissors. All 3 men look very strong, you don't cut anyone's title reign short, you don't give Wardlow a 3-day title reign, and Darby Allin isn't involved to have a very cheap 20-day title reign. And when you look at the lineage now and you compare it to what I've just suggested the lineage is, it becomes pretty clear that AEW needs to move to more simplicity. I understand you maybe wanted to give Darby something to make him viable for a world title shot, but I'm not sure that overcomplicating the TNT titles lineage was the right way to go about it. And with the way Sammy Guevara staked his claim to the world title, it obviously wasn't necessary to have any success prior. So why did Darby have a 1-month reign? All right, let's get into it now. Last but not least, the All-Atlantic title, which is now called the International title. First of all, the name change sucks. All-Atlantic title was way better than the International title. I don't care if the countries actually touched the Atlantic Ocean or not. The name All-Atlantic was so much better than International. I don't know how anybody thinks otherwise. And I mean, why does it even matter what it's called? All-Atlantic, International, when it's 2 Americans facing each other more often than not. Like I said earlier, Pac was a great inaugural champion, and his title reign was actually very good. Having him on television more often than not was fantastic. He had some really good matches, and he was on AEW Dynamite defending it. He really is one of the best in-ring workers around. However, when it comes to title reigns, I cannot say the same about Orange Cassidy. Look, I'm not gonna lie, I've never been an OC guy. I will never be an OC guy. So yes, I am extremely biased when I say this, but Orange Cassidy as a singles champion is the biggest waste of a title I have ever seen in my life. Regardless of the fact that this guy goes around carrying the title in a backpack, not even showing the prestigious title. Well, it's meant to be a prestigious title. He just goes around backstage and he hands out title shots. He just says, he's just standing in front of someone. Do you want a title shot? Apart from that, regardless of those 2 things, which I find so heinous to do to a championship, so abhorrent to do to a championship, any championship. Leave that all aside. We'll put that aside. That's my personal prejudice. Let's look at it objectively. The guy is so boring. and his matches are even more boring. I understand the character, I'm not oblivious to that, I know what the gimmick is, but his gimmick does not fall in line with a champion in a professional wrestling company. Every single one of his title defenses that I've watched has followed the exact same formula. He is heavily beaten down, and usually some body part is injured that prevents him from hitting the orange punch cleanly, but he somehow finds a way to win and survive. It's become so overdone, so bland, and some of the names that have competed for the belt should be nowhere near a championship in this company. Overall, the International Championship needs a lot of help. When I look at AEW's roster, and I see some of the great international wrestlers they have at their disposal, the likes of Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, Andrade El Idolo, Konosuke Takeshita, Miro. God damn it, Miro. Thank God he's back, by the way. Ooh, those of you that watch the channel, you know I love Miro. I'm so happy he's back. Christian Cage, Ethan Page, Phoenix, Penta, just to name a few. All of these guys could easily be international champions with a proper build behind them, and to be fair, some have gotten title shots, but none have been built up well enough. When AEW first went through its signing on phase, I thought most of the moves were brilliant. WWE was letting go of world-class talent, and AEW's roster, while really talented, lacked the depth that it needed in the mid-card. And while most of the new signings had a great first 2 or 3 months, very few of them have become long-term successes in AEW, especially the guys that really made their names in NXT. Adam Cole, I would argue, is the one WWE signing that looks like he'll be a long-term success, as I believe he's being lined up for a world title run after MJF, but when we look at Andrade, Malachi, Swerve, and Keith Lee, they all had a red-hot start but quickly faded into obscurity. Malachi Black has resurrected himself, but the other 3 are just floundering. Hopefully with AEW Collision's introduction, we see more of these returns, but it stuns me that world-class talent haven't found a spot on AEW's A-Show. It is criminal that you can't find money in a guy like Miro. I know, Miro's coming up a lot, trust me, I know. Who already showed he could be one of the most dominant champions in the world while he was holding a secondary title. It is criminal that you can't see money in a guy like Andrade, who has the look, the connection to the Latino fan base, and most importantly, the in-ring ability, other than putting over Cody Rhodes. That's all he's done. While I don't like what they're doing with Swerve now, he should be a TNT champion, as should Keith Lee. They were a really good tag team who should have had a memorable and meaningful feud after they broke up, akin to Kenny and Hangman, but they didn't get anywhere near that, and neither are in any significant role right now. Even if you have a somewhat significant role, that doesn't necessarily mean you're being used correctly, and there are examples of this as well. Look no further than Daniel Garcia. Garcia was the equivalent of an absolute uncontested slam dunk. Here is a guy who was meant to be in the BCC, but for some reason ended up with the Jericho Appreciation Society, and here comes Bryan Danielson, his hero, and the type of wrestler he is molded after, pleading with him to change his ways and turn professional wrestler. Garcia is the ROH Pure Champion, and his mentor, Chris Jericho, is the ROH World Champion and is challenging and defeating former ROH champions. How do you not turn him face? Have him challenge Jericho to a title versus title match, be the champion to defeat Jericho, and unify the ROH Pure and World titles the way his idol Bryan Danielson did over 15 years ago. You turn Garcia into a world champion. You establish him as a legit guy. You begin to develop a genuine character around him, a character that the future of his career will be built off. I made a whole video calling the JAS and Jericho genius because I assumed that was the way it was going. It was right in front of our eyes. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. You just have to pull the trigger. What happens instead? He's still Jericho's lackey after berating him and telling him he's a professional wrestler, completely going back on everything he said and making himself look stupid the way Sammy Guevara did. Except neither are champions. Jericho loses to Claudio, Garcia loses to Wheeler. Why? What purpose does that serve? Yes, Claudio is fantastic. Yes, Wheeler has a solid future, but why did either of them need the titles back? Garcia could have joined BCC as ROH World Champion, and Claudio and Wheeler could have gone for tag titles or had no titles at all. I could so easily see a great feud between Garcia and Wheeler, both part of Blackpool Combat Club, trying to outdo each other and be the better youngster. You could even have Wheeler challenge Garcia to the world title, lose, win, whatever you want to do. Or you could have had Garcia go independent and carry an ROH brand, which, in my opinion, really is not worth carrying at this stage, but one that you could have developed into a young breeding ground for AEW. A lot of you might argue that it was too early for Garcia to be world champion, and I don't disagree with that if you're talking about the Garcia we're seeing right now, but a Garcia booked properly, with a world champion around him, touting himself as a professional wrestler, and being proud of being a professional wrestler, that would have worked. I'm telling you guys, that would have worked. And that circles us back nicely to title reigns. On paper, some of these reigns have been really good, but when you actually dissect how some of the matches come about and what happens in the matches themselves, we begin to see a trend that has grown in AEW in the last 12 months and the way that their matches are booked. Let's start with something really simple: the run-ins, the referee distractions, the match restarts, and the overall unnecessary twists and turns in the script that actually cheapen the matches and devalue the titles. The amount of run-ins in AEW in 2023 has been way too frequent, and it's really confusing as to why this has become such a common occurrence. I'm not sure if it's Tony Khan's way of introducing more talent on each show by having them do a run-in, or a way to get the crowd hot, but whatever the thought process is, it's quite clearly the wrong way of producing the desired result. It cheapens every single match that it takes place in. Very rarely does a distraction or run-in add to a match. Yes, there is a time and place, for example, a major heel or face turn, but they should really be a rarity in professional wrestling. And the reason is, once again, to keep the value in each match, each win, and each wrestler high. It helps no one when every single win in AEW is tainted by some kind of asterisk. It also brings into question the consistency of the kayfabe or the rules that are implemented on Dynamite. 90% of the time, there will be a dirty finish with no repercussions. However, every so often, there is a strange kind of video referee that jumps in, whether it be Tony Khan himself booking a rematch, which makes me question why the owner of the company, who is meant to be fair and impartial, would only be rebooking matches for some injustices and not others, or whether it be an extra referee running in and overturning the match official's decision, which is even more infuriating. The kayfabe behind wrestling is that there is no video referee. There is no third umpire. There are no retrospective corrections to a referee's final decision. When the bell rings, the bell rings. If the match official doesn't see it, he cannot call it. Which makes me question, actually, why has the Eddie Guerrero fake chair shot been used multiple times, I would say, now on AEW? If the referee doesn't see it, he can't call it. Maybe because he heard it, but then they must be deaf because there's a lot of things that happen around them that they don't hear. It's vital in any sport that there is a consistency in enforcing of rules and regulations. It's what keeps a fair and level playing field for competitors and what provides a consistent product for the consumer. And forever, within the world of professional wrestling, the bell being rung by the match official was final. Regardless of any replays, regardless of any other officials being present, the responsibility of calling the match is the match referee's job. If anything, it discredits the referees even more than they already are, which is another major issue with all the constant shenanigans. These things aren't always timed the best, and there's been numerous occurrences of referees missing blatant cheating right in front of their eyes. Professional wrestling is about suspending your disbelief and buying into the kayfabe that you are watching a professional sport. And it's really difficult to do that with the amount of trickery that happens on a week-to-week basis and how inconsistently it's dealt with, but it's even worse when things are timed badly and it happens right in front of the referee's eyes. So many of these points that I've brought up have such easy fixes, which leads me to being even more frustrated. It's not that AEW doesn't have enough talent. It's not that they don't have the tools to provide a really high quality program week to week. They've done it before. They used to make such engaging content. I compared their storytelling to that of One Piece, a series that has been going on with long-term storytelling for nearly 25 years. Lately, it feels like we've moved to a shorter-term episodic series where every episode has a completely different story. There is no cadence, there is no continuity. Every week, something else happens. We're pulling in another direction. Nothing is linking, nothing is fluid. And that's what made AEW so magical in the first place. That's what separated it from its North American competitors. It wasn't quite as good as New Japan, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't need to be. It was still providing us with plenty to talk about and theorize about and fangirl about and fantasy book. Right now, I feel that isn't worth it at all because most storylines are failing to eventuate to anything worth substance. And I say most because even now there is still a glimmer of hope. Something tells me that we have hit the bottom of the trough and are ascending to the peak once again. This is not anything new. I have felt like this for 6 months. Finally, I've felt compelled to make this video because I do feel like discussing AEW content again. Moving past the 4-way match with the Pillars and leading into All In and Forbidden Door, I feel AEW could catch fire again. This is largely spearheaded by the Elite, whose presence on AEW television always signifies something important and major happening, and their involvement with BCC has created potentially the biggest rivalry in AEW history when it comes to purely name value. Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, Claudio Castagnoli, Kenny Omega, Hangman, and the Young Bucks. Throw in the possibility of a 2-time G1 Climax winner, former IWGP World Champion, former tag team partner of Kenny Omega, Kota Ibushi being involved, maybe, and you've even got a bigger lineup. But you really don't need that. That's just me putting in a bit of New Japan spice in there. But that isn't all that I'm excited about. Jay White's introduction to AEW, he's one of my top professional wrestlers that I like watching, along with the introduction of AEW Collision and how that's going to be managed. There's plenty of opportunity for AEW to steer this ship around and reclaim the magical dust they once sprinkled every single week. And I think that's my point here. That's why I've made this video, because I want to talk about AEW again because of these very few crumbs that have been left. But I do feel that Tony Khan can turn this around. He has the weapons at his disposal. For those of you that have been watching the channel for a long time, you know that I very rarely make negative videos on AEW. And that's why I haven't made a video in so long, because if I was making videos, they would have all been negative, and that's not what I want to do. The part of AEW content that I enjoyed making was the theorizing, was the fantasy booking. That's the stuff that really gets me excited, but I can't fantasy book for a show that makes no sense. For those of you that have stuck around, for those of you that are still interested in the channel, thank you. I don't really want to go on a massive hiatus, but this is not by any means my full-time job, so I do enjoy this channel. It's a nice way for me to get my thoughts out in some way and talk about professional wrestling with people that enjoy it. So hopefully I see you after Double or Nothing. I think it's going to be a solid show. I think it's actually going to be a really good show. I will put this out there. I do hope Christian Cage beats Wardlow. That's my one sneaky upset alert for Double or Nothing. Let me know how you guys have been going. Let me know what you guys are enjoying on the show, what you're not enjoying on the show, what you agree with, disagree with in this video. I'll see you all in the next one. See you, boys.